excited to be in the Zoom room with every single one of you. And I've said it numerous times today, and I'll say it again. You are the change makers in the world today. You are the lights that light up the path for others and for yourselves and for your friends and for your family to connect more deeply with nature, who you are, how you're here to serve, and growing nutrient dense, delicious food while communing with the earth and while amplifying the wisdom of nature. And that is probably one of the most profound ways that we can engage in the world today, because we are nature. Like Elder says, human nature. It's one of my favorite things. So welcome. And we are in for another treat today because we have Laura Decker in our company. And Laura is Laura's mom, Dr. Judy. She passed over the past year, and I can feel her presence here. And I only got to meet her once, but it was one of the most beautiful exchanges of energy and words and inspiration that I have encountered. Her heart and her curiosity about soil and about life was both voracious and tender. And it inspired her to dive deep into understanding what made soil healthy. And she wanted people to be able to measure that. So some people are able to look at soil or pick it up in their hands and smell it, and they're like, yeah, this is good soil, or yeah, this is good compost. They just know. And some people like to rely more on science. And, Dr. Elaine Ingham, she's one of those people. In the Soil Summit, I asked her, I'm like, well, what about people who can pick up soil and smell? And she's like, basically, she said, Natalie, that's not me. And I need a microscope. And I think that's where the microbiometer comes in as well. And so sometimes it's for somebody who already feels like they have good soil, so they can verify it. And for some people, it's a learning tool to help them identify what that good soil might really smell like, look like, feel like, and vibrate like. So we are going to be talking about the microbiometer a little bit, as well as diving into what makes your soil healthy. How do you know if it's healthy, and why is it so important? We've talked about that a lot in the Gardening Summit, and really, I wish I remember who it was. Oh, it was Greg Reese. He was saying that he always heard that soil was healthy, or that like the importance of soil health was the foundation of a vibrant garden or a vibrant crop. And it took him years before he went, oh, soil health is what I need to focus on. So if you're just beginning, you're in the right place at the right time, because I think every single session we've been talking about soil health. And this is just another perspective, another opportunity to learn more and to take those steps in. So Laura Decker is here with us, and she is an incredible human who works closely with a really small team of people who bring the microbiometer and awareness about healthy soil into all different corners of the world. And she gives a lot of her time, a lot of her energy, and she's like one of the voices of her mom's work. So we welcome you, Laura, and thank you for your time today.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be invited, and I'm excited to see so many people. I have a feeling that everyone here, knows probably more than me about a lot of different things. So I'm really hoping that we can be more interactive. What I tell people is I am not a microbiologist, but I play one on TV, So I know quite a bit, but not everything. So please jump in. And as the science of microbes and microscopic life grows, both in soil and in human health, we learn things new all the time. So some of you might know some new things for us. I'll give you a little bit of background about me. My name is Laura Decker. As Natalie mentioned, my mother, Dr. Judith Fitzpatrick, had a PhD in microbiology. She was really passionate about microbes. She used to love to talk about what they would do. She would, as a kid, she thought of them as little people functioning around. And she worked in medical diagnostic testing for a long, long time, developing sort of just different tests about protein in the body for the medical system. When she had a business and sold it, she then started looking at the legacy of her life, right? She was a workaholic. She worked until about 10 days before she passed away. And she loved to work, and she really wanted to do something meaningful with her legacy. And so she got very involved with sort of seeing how she could help contribute somehow to climate change, improving the world, right? And she met a greenhouse grower who was like, soil microbes, that's the way to naturally grow things. And she was like, microbes, that's my passion. So she worked for about 10 years on her own in the basement and the attic, developing a test. She had a real passion to make the technology accessible to people around the world. So I know you guys are in Canada, but we're in the United States. And in the United States, a lot of the agriculture is based on big tractors and robots and satellites. But around the world, where most of the farmers are and where most of the food is grown, people have under 5 hectares, right? So she wanted something that was accessible and safe and could be used around the place, not some $1 million piece of equipment, right? So what she came up with after all of this is what we have now is the microbiometer. It's actually field portable. And what she wanted to do was help people understand the importance of microbes in soil, right? Because she knew from all the reading, and we'll talk more about the importance of it in the cycle, but she knew that some people needed data to understand. And also, as we move from traditional, or I guess we moved away from traditional growing practices, right, to modern. And now we need to move away from the so-called modern practices of herbicides and pesticides. We like to call that chemical farming, right? It's sort of like feeding you with just Ensure and multivitamins, right? Yeah, you'll be alive, but you won't feel very good. She wanted a tool to help people move away so they could see when I increase the microbes, or what, how do I increase the microbes? And when I increase the microbes at the end of the growing cycle, my crop is better, healthier. And of course, there's lots of people doing work on evaluating nutrient density in foods, right? We don't do that, but that's really cool too. So you can be like, you can see the whole chain. So what we're going to talk about today is just sort of what microbes do. There's a lot of information out there. One of the coolest guys out there doing stuff is Dr. James White, who's working on rhizophagy, which is just really, really fun. And he has a lot of things online on YouTube that you can see. It's pretty long. He's a scientist, so it gets pretty in depth, but he's a teacher. So I'm going to do sort of a short little presentation, and then I was hoping we'd open it up, not just to questions for me, but questions for each other, so people can talk about best practices. So Leslie, should I share my screen now? Okay. Here we go. You think they'd make it better, right? There we go. Can you see it? It's okay? It's good.
That's great.
Okay. So this presentation is called Understanding the Role of Soil Microbes, right? That's me. So symbiosis, this, hopefully people have some awareness of this. You can get very, very deep into the symbiosis between microbial life in soil and plants. So just the way we're learning that gut health is not just part of human health, but part of our brain chemistry, right? Same thing with microbes in soil. So there's a real symbiosis between plants and the living creatures in the soil, right? That's virus, bacteria, fungi, nematodes, worms, right? All the way up to, big things, rabbits, things like that. We know that plants photosynthesize, right? We used to think that roots go into the soil and they're like little miners. They take the nitrogen and they suck it into their roots and put it in their plants. Well, now we know that's not really true. They need a conduit, and the microbes are the real ones that mine the nutrients and make it what we call bioavailable to plants, which is why in conventional farming, you have to keep putting more and more nitrogen into the soil, right? Because it's not available, it leaches out. If you have microbes in the soil, they'll eat up the nitrogen, hold it in their bodies, and then when the plants need it, the plants will stimulate through hormonal activity for the microbes to give them the nutrients. So you can look to see that really it's an entire system of barter. And Judy loved the system of barter, right? If you think about all the microbes in there, and we'll get into that a little bit, each microbe is very small and it can only make 1 or 2 compounds, but it needs lots and lots of compounds to live. And they trade compounds. So microbe A makes a compound that microbe B needs. Microbe B makes a compound that A and C need. And they trade them back and forth, right? And then they trade with the plant as well. Supplying plant nutrients by chemical alone, I think everyone is on this board, stunts the development of healthy roots, right? We all know that life is efficient, right? If you do not walk, your legs will atrophy, right? Same thing with roots. If you feed the plant chemical food, their root structure will not develop because the plant doesn't have to put energy into roots. It can just sort of suck it up through the straw, right? Instead of roots. Now, everyone who has a garden knows that roots help aerate. They put carbon into the soil. They build structure. They make little homes that air and water can live in. So without adequate roots growing in your soil, you really get very compacted soil with very little water holding capacity and almost no air. So this is a little picture of a controlled plant. And then what happens to the roots if you feed it phosphate, nitrate, ammonium, and potassium. Healthy soil is dependent on the microbial community for plant required mineral and nutrients. So they trade back and forth. A plant needs nitrogen, the microbe will put nitrogen in its body, and it'll either trade outside of the cell wall, or rhizophagy, which is what Dr. White talked about, is the process by which roots actually pull microbes into their cell structure, extract some of the nutrients, right? Give it some more nutrients, and then excrete the microbes out of the plant. So there's a lot of examples of how microbes from the soil appear in leaves, right? For those of you who grow, and I hope I'm not offending anyone, cannabis, when the trichomes become cloudy, right? When it's ready to be harvested, the cloudiness is caused by microbes that came up from the soil into the plant, okay? And we do know that when the trichomes are ready, that's what gives cannabis a lot of its flavor, taste, and sort of micronutrients. We know that microbes also digest the litter. So if a plant dies, the root structure is in the soil, and the microbes will digest that, turning it into soil carbon. We'll talk about soil carbon in a little bit, okay? Again, microbes help create soil structure. As microbes grow in big communities, they'll secrete a sticky substance. I forgot what it's called. It's not a very original name. I think it's called sticky substance. They secrete this sticky substance that makes little aggregates, and in the aggregate can be little pockets for water and air, and it means that the microbes and the nutrients don't get washed away, okay? That stickiness after the microbe dies stays, and that's a big part of soil structure. So people know, right, If you have really, really good healthy soil that you've cultivated over a long time, you don't have to till it all the time, right? Because those microbes are making soil structure, you have nematodes and worms aerating your soil and keeping it in there. If you don't have a lot of microbes or root structure, you get compacted soil, right? And that's where the need for tilling comes into it. One of the real pushes in regenerative agriculture is a real curtailing of tilling, but it's a virtuous cycle, right? As soil structure gets healthier and roots get healthier, you don't need to till more. But if you're not in that virtuous cycle of improving soil, you actually do need to till, because there's nothing in the soil that is helping it maintain any spaces for air and water. And the other cool thing is that microbes and plants actually communicate with each other. Microbes send information up the plant via hormones to give it information about what's going on in the soil. Fungi in particular are incredibly important in plant immunity, okay? So if a pathogen comes in, and when we talk about microbes, some can become pathogenic, some are pathogenic, right? So we're not saying all microbes are good, but I mean, there are pathogenic things in there. There is a system, and you can read about it more if you're interested, whereby the microbes sense a pathogen or something that's attacking the plant. They release hormones to the plant, and the plant releases hormones back into the soil to fight that pathogen. Now, that is really the development of antioxidants, okay? You have really rich antioxidant food, and antioxidants, right, are what help our immune system, okay? So if you want to eat kale, because it has antioxidants to help you not get the flu, you need to have eaten kale that was exposed to pathogens, because exposure to pathogens in a plant will give it that antioxidant, immune, hormone, and chemical to eat. If you grow food that is sterilely grown, right, your plant will not have had any illness. It's just sort of like the first time your kid goes to daycare, right? They haven't really been exposed to a lot of pathogens, so they'll get sick. If you have plants that haven't been exposed to things, they can get sick quite easily, right? So we want a hardy, we want an environment that actually has pathogens in it, right? So that plants can get immunity, and that we can essentially piggyback on that immunity and eat it. So that's one of the reasons why I think hydroponics is somewhat controversial in terms of food and nutrient density. I don't know enough to speak about hydroponics. Our test doesn't work on hydroponics for some boring technical reasons. But if you do grow things sort of without natural pathogens, you won't get that communication. And sequestering carbon. So in farming, one of the big talks is helping farmers, helping them be better stewards of the soil and help them be more financially viable. This is particularly true in India and Africa, right? And so everyone's hope in the regenerative world is that farmers will soon be able to farm food and carbon, right? So they'll have two revenue streams. The revenue stream of carbon will enable them to adopt more climate-friendly practices and also raise the standard of living for millions of smallhold farmers around the world. So microbes are about 60% carbon. They have very short, very active lives. They reproduce, some of them every 15 minutes. I don't know how long they live, but not very long. And when they die, all the nutrients that were in their body gets lysed and added back to the soil, including carbon. And then that carbon becomes food for the next generation of microbes and plants. So the cycle goes around and around. Microbial food security. So food security for microbes is just as important as it is for plants. You need microbes to have stable food sources so that the plant can have a stable food source, so that we can have a stable food source, right? Soil organic carbon is broken down into two. They have lots of different names, and I'm sure it can get much more complex if you want. Fresh soil organic carbon is broken down plant material that's close to the surface and really quickly available to microbes, okay? This is easily accessible carbon, okay, that will help sort of prime microbes to start growing, okay? For us, or like a little kid, this would be like Skittles, right? You get there, grab the sugar, you eat it, okay? When you put down compost, or even some compost teas with molasses, you're putting down some fresh soil organic carbon to really prime that community to start reproducing. Microbes are dormant, right? They go dormant. So if you feed them, they'll start to reproduce. But just like the sugar low, if there's not stable organic carbon in your soil, those microbes will go crazy, run around like a kindergartner, and then die. So stable organic carbon is the carbon litter from dead microbes and from plants, and the molecular remains of dead animals and other things. This is sort of like, you know, the carbohydrates of the soil world, right? It's there, it's a little bit more work to mine, but you need it so that the organisms can continue, microbes can continue to grow, and then work with the plant to feed the plant the nutrition that it needs. So you can see a little diagram of how it goes. And then when we talk about soil sequestering carbon in the soil, sort of sequestered carbon is like the end of it, right? It's sort of the objective. We think about it, or sometimes when they talk about it, it's as if they just want to take it from the air and put it in the ground, right, to slow climate change. But really, it needs to be there so that the plant cycle can continue. Building a balanced microbial community. There's no formula. It's not easy. It depends on your soil, your climate, your crop, what you're doing to the soil, and what's been done to it in the past. One of the hardest things we have is we sell this test to help people sort of measure microbes so they can get a sense. And they all call us and say, now, what do I do now? And I say, oh, that's the, you know, $1 trillion question. I'm sorry. You have to figure it out yourself. So that's, I'm hoping that you all, when we go to Q&A, can share sort of best practices. Also knowing that what works in Vermont doesn't work in Australia, right? There are amazing amendments out there that are good for some places and not others, right? If you hear someone say this will work everywhere, every time, just think a little bit, right? Okay. Except for, you know, compost is sort of a universal. But compost is best if it's a local compost, right? Because you want the thing that your environment has already been adapted to, right? You don't want to bring in some strange compost from another country, even though it's very hard to do that. The goal is to create optimum conditions for microbes to thrive, right? You think about that pyramid, microbes are at the bottom. You want them to thrive, right? Then the roots will thrive. Then the plant will thrive, right? Then the crop that we eat will thrive, and then we will thrive, okay? Feeding microbes, right? So when you think about, I'm going to fertilize my plants, really what you should be thinking is, I'm going to fertilize my microbes so they can fertilize and grow my plant, okay? And you don't want to do something that's what we call shallow, right? Compost teas are amazing. I'm not saying they're not good, but if you have a beach of sand, right? You can put as much compost tea as you can possibly make into the sand, and you're not going to grow corn, right? Because once those microbes land and eat the food that's in that compost tea, there's nothing left for them, right? So you want to work on saying, do I need to add organic matter to my soil? Do I initially need to till my soil because it's so compacted that I can't get that cycle going, right? And from there, and do I need to start planting cover crops? I'm sure people have talked about cover crops. Cover crops do a bunch of different things. They keep down wind erosion. They build root structure, right? Roots both aerate the soil and also put, right, carbon, which comes from photosynthesis, into the ground so that microbes can eat it, so that microbes can supply it. Solutions. Solutions. So you say, okay, my soil isn't as fertile as I need it to be. The food that I'm growing on it is not as abundant as I want, and perhaps it's lacking in nutrient density. We do know that food grown organically, sort of, I don't want to say anecdotally, because I think everyone knows that it tastes better. And that's because microbes are a part of it, because in organic farming, you simply cannot use all the cheats that people have been using. So these are solutions to sort of poor soil. Chemical fertilizers, okay? We all know they've been used, NPK, they're expensive. They over time deplete the natural soil microbial population. They contribute to soil degradation. They contribute to erosion, reduced water holding capacity. But they are and can be something that's used, right? Particularly at the beginning of a rehabilitation of soil, okay? So we say judicial use is fine, but you really need to think about, is that your thing? Microbial inputs are incredibly important. But often, I think I brought about it before, the issue is that the soil can't support the microbes, okay? Not that microbes are missing, okay? So people always wonder where do the microbes come from? Well, you know, look around, they're everywhere. They literally fall out of the sky onto your soil, okay? So not that there aren't some really cool microbial inputs, particularly mycorrhizal fungi that are really, really good for the soil. But if you have sort of sterile soil, it's not because you don't have microbes around. It's because it's a really inhospitable environment for microbes, okay? Research is ongoing, but it's unclear how much microbial populations also vary by location, right? So are the microbes in Burma the same as the ones that are in North Carolina, right? We don't know that. People are starting to DNA and analyze the microbial world. God bless them. It's going to take them years. There's literally billions of types of microbes. Microbes have very little DNA, okay? They have about 1/100th of the DNA that we have, which means that when they you know, have a change in DNA or an aberration, they change tremendously. One of the neatest things we learned is that between two bacteria in the soil, the genetic difference is equal or greater to me and a cow, okay? So they're quite different. But you also know that me and the cow share tons of DNA together. Just a couple key pieces make the difference. So mycorrhizal fungi, cover crops, talked about cover crops, why they're so important. The mantra is no bare soil, right? You want something growing. A lot of gardeners just put down in the winter, particularly if you're in Vermont or somewhere cold, you're not going to put grow lights on and try to grow something in January, but you are going to put leaves down, right? You're going to try to cover up the soil to keep it somewhat insulated, to keep it moist, to keep it from running off. And biostimulants. So biostimulants are very big in the regenerative world. They work because they provide better conditions for microbes to grow, okay? So a lot of biostimulants have microbes in them. You'll see them out there. They perpetuate a system that they work to break that system of chemical needs. Again, if you're looking for a biostimulant to help your soil microbes, you most likely have to do some testing, right? Which ones work in my soil, which ones are the best. So this is us, because I get to give a little kit. So it's true. One of the things about soil, and a lot of people who are experienced, right, and even people who aren't, right, you know when soil smells. I mean, I think we have a biology. You know when you see the world's darkest soil. I mean, kids eat soil because it looks good, right? And so do adults. You know if you have soil that is clumpy, right? In the good way, not in a clay way, smells good, has stuff in it, it's healthy. But a lot of people, as they transition, want and need a measure, right? The ultimate measure for how your soil is doing is the plants, but that takes a long time. So we have this kit, it's right here, and people use it just kind of baseline. Where's my soil? as I try different practices or grow different crops, are my microbes going up and down? We also do fungal to bacteria ratio. So fungal content is incredibly important in food you eat, berries, cannabis, grapes. That fungal component gives really that terroir and that taste to crops. So a lot of people inoculate their soil and roots with mycorrhizal fungi applicants, and they want to know if they're working, right? So you can put it in the soil, but is it staying? So I'm going to inoculate my soil, test it, and in a month, I'm going to see, did my fungal to bacteria ratio go up? Or I try to biostimulate. In 2 weeks, did I get a boost in the microbes and then they die because something else is wrong? Or did I get a boost in the microbes that stayed up, so that I know that that cycle of natural nutrition for my plant is getting better and better? So that's it. And that's me. We're a very small company. We're 4 people in the Hudson Valley of New York State. And we're pretty committed to the area. We do all our employment, manufacturing here, and all our fulfillment. I will say that we do most of our sales internationally. I know most of us are in this call are from, although I saw someone from England, but a lot of the world is a little bit ahead of, at least of the US, in terms of trying to stop using chemical means of farming and move to a more sustainable, healthy way. So I just talked a lot. Thank you for listening to me about soil and microbes and the cycle. And if people, we can talk more about rhizophagy and about soil structure, or people can sort of talk about what things have worked for them in terms of rehabilitating really poor soils. I know a lot of people, particularly in urban areas, are working to take something that used to just be a field of grass that feels like concrete, right, and turn it into something that is vibrant and alive, and not lawn, because lawn is one of the biggest crops in the United States, unfortunately, and it's not a particularly climate-friendly crop, and you can't eat it. So that's it. So I think, Leslie, should we open it up?
Yeah, let's do that. You can drop your questions in the chat if you have any questions, or if you have something that's really worked for you. You're welcome to drop that in chat. If you want to come on screen and share, you're more than welcome to do that as well. Laura, I'm curious. So we've had people all like Mexico, Australia. I don't know if they're in the room right now, but Ecuador. Okay. All over the world. So it's really eclectic. Lots, and there, Canada and US as well. I wish I had my microbiometer upstairs. I have a microbiometer myself, and it's a really cool kit. It is used. And so I'm curious. And sorry, one more thing. We're going to put Dr. Judy's interview in the chat. Leslie's going to do that. And also we did an interview with Dr. James White as well on the rhizophagy cycle that you're talking about, Laura. And it's a really, really good interview. Someone actually just shared it on their Instagram story this morning and tagged us. And they're like, everyone has to watch this. Yeah. And the great thing about this interview with Dr. James White is it really, we kept the conversation quite simple. And so anybody can understand it, and he speaks that way. He's a professor and he speaks that way anyways. He can speak at a very high level, but I was like, if you're explaining this to a 5-year-old, what would those words be? And so it's really, it's an awesome interview. And so thanks for giving him a shout out as well.
Yeah, and it's funny, and I'm sure there's people in the room right now. Dr. White worked for years and years and years in obscurity, on this thing, and I'm sure people called him all kinds of names. I think the same is true for Elaine Ingham, right? When she first started talking about it, she was really treated quite terribly. And so it's really nice to see people who've been sort of working at it tirelessly without any acknowledgement really come into their own.
Yeah.
and really be like, oh my gosh, you know. And so
Yeah.
that to me is really exciting when we can really shine the light on people who've been there. I will say also about Elaine Ingham, because you brought up the microscope. Microscopy is awesome. If you're in the food soil web and you have a microscope and you can read it, God bless you. It's hard. So our test was actually designed to sort of mimic it at a higher level, right? For people who don't have a microscope, don't have the skills for it. But we have been validated against microscopy. Earthfort, which is a lab that uses us in Oregon, actually gave up microscopy in favor of our test. They spent about 6 months testing it. But if you are looking for very particular microbes, right, or different types of fungi, then you do have to go back to either microscopy or sort of a more specific test.
Mm-hmm. So, Laura, who typically is using a tool like the microbiometer? Is it home gardeners, or is it farmers, or is it both?
Yeah. So our typical users, we gave them a term, which is not that original, but farmer researcher. So the typical user is someone who's a soil steward, growing food, often in agriculture for a living, and they want something different besides than their agronomist who says, I did a chemical test of your soil and you need to throw down, 30, 10, 10 NPK. And so they're trying to figure out how to take all these different practices, right, and products out there and adapt them for their own farming. So there are people who are trying to gather information, not just on soil chemistry, right, which is what a lot of the tests are, but soil biology. And they're trying to benchmark. So we also know with soil microbes, they change throughout the year, right? Your result in December is going to be lower than July, right? And that's not because you did anything bad. It's because they're living creatures. They live and die cyclically. And so what they do is try to baseline. Okay, or figure out which cover crop is the most effective, right? I have 2 fields. I plant different cover crops. I'm going to test the microbes and see which one is better. Now, sometimes you want a cover crop because it's fixing nitrogen, right? So even if it has a lower microbial count, you're still happy with it. But it's one of the data pieces that you use to make decisions. Gardeners are starting to be what's in there. And one of our funnest groups of people is students. Our test is easy to use. There's nothing dangerous. The only sort of chemical that's in it is this packet, which is salt, right? You can eat it. I wouldn't eat it, but if you did, nothing bad would happen to it. So kids doing science experiments or trying to understand soil and microbes, right? They might not be able to use a microscope in 5th grade, but they can do this. They do little experiments with containers to say, if I use the fertilizer I got at Lowe's compared to a compost tea, what are my microbes and how does the plant look? And so that's super fun for us to have sort of a new generation of kids learning about it and understanding what it means to the food produced.
That's really, really cool, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
So Leslie said, so using the microbiometer before and after she uses compost will help her understand her progress.
Yes. And also what we tell people is, you do it before and then you do it, the test we're designing, refills are about $6. So you can do it often and then test a month or 2 later to see. You also need to know that it's a living thing. So when seeds start to germinate into the soil, the plant puts out exudates and stimulates microbial growth, right? And then the plant's growing. But plants, just like women, right? When they start having a baby, seeds, right? They stop feeding the microbes. So sometimes right before a crop is ready, your microbe count will go down naturally, right? So you have to know a little bit about the soil, the plant that's growing in it, and what the natural cycle is, right? Because, you could put a crop down and then winter comes, right? And so it would be hard to tell. So you really do want to do it over time and not just act like I got a good number, but whatever your number is, track it. Okay. This is not like school where you get an A, right? Your soil can always be healthy. We say agricultural soil reads around 200 to 600 micrograms of microbial carbon. If you have a cannabis inside that you've been nurturing for years, you can be at 2,200, right? But you're not going to get that in a farm. So yeah, people use it to say, is my compost tea? It also works on compost tea, so you can do a little quality test. But did my compost tea work initially, and did it work 2 or 3 weeks later, right?
That's really cool. Alec asks if it tests to detect bug eggs and spider mites and aphids.
No, your eyeballs do that. Our test determines bacteria and fungi only. So poor little nematodes, I'm sorry to say, get killed in our process. And someone once asked me about earthworms, and I said, well, just count them. If one's in the tube, you take a very small amount of soil in this tube. So if you have an earthworm in here, you did it wrong. We test bacteria and fungi. So I know that there are other microbes, but they're not tested in it. And we also don't discriminate between good and bad microbes. Okay. My anecdote is like microbes are a little like kindergartners. There could be a bad one, but most of the time they're not bad as long as they're under control, which is why we talk about diversity in the microbial community. So the bigger your population is, the more diverse it'll be, because microbes barter with each other. So the more microbes you have, the more microbes you can have, right? Because they'll keep sending stuff around. And then there's a really cool concept called quorum sensing, which is just, it happens in you as well. So like, for example, on your skin, you always have staph, right? Bacteria, but you don't have a staph infection, right? Because all the microbes are keeping you in check. When something happens to weaken your immune system or something goes on and the staph sort of start to reproduce, they'll get this thing called quorum sensing. Well, they'll be like, just like an army, there's enough of us, let's attack. And they'll attack, right? And then the other, either your immune system or the other bacteria will fight them. When you have a diverse population, you're less likely to have any one microbe hit the quorum where they can become virulent. So you might have microbes in there that if they could, they would, cause problems, but they're being held in check. I went on a tangent. I forgot what the question was.
That's okay. Yeah, that's okay. Would you agree, Laura? So some of us in the room might not really like tracking our soil is like, I mean, just showing up and knowing we have soil is kind of where we're at. And we know now that we need to build our soil health. We know now that compost is great. And we've learned maybe that cover cropping and mulching is fabulous. And just to track the actual cycle of the plants and know when to test the soil, it sounds kind of overwhelming. And I'm just curious if it would be true that maybe testing it at the same time, like would be helpful.
Yeah. So what we tell people is sort of, it's sort of like learning, like if you're told you have high blood pressure, right? You have to test it and see what affects it, right? Do I take a medicine? Does it make it lower, right? If I drink caffeine, does it make it higher? It's the same thing. So you want to test soil sort of the same period in the weather and the growth cycle, okay? If you're having a terrible drought, okay, you know that your microbe count will be lower, right? Than if it's a really nice spring. And you also want to test sort of the same place, particularly if you're looking at a lawn or a pasture. There can be a lot of diversity from place to place in the soil. So you want to go to the same place. Our app, we have an app, everyone has an app. It has instructions on it, and you can GPS locate where you took the sample. And it'll put a date and time stamp, and you can put little notes in there. It just rained, it's been dry. Pretty soon we'll have a little feature where you can take a picture, maybe of the plant that it was next to and how big it was, right? So you can go from there. So we really, I wish I could tell people you just do this test and then I'll tell you exactly what to do. And then, in a month, you'll have the world's greatest everything. But of course, it's taken us 200 years to sort of, deplete a lot of this soil. And it's going to take our brains, right? And some time to fix it. But yeah, I mean, the things in regenerative are no bare soil, cover crops, very selective tilling is what they call it now. So if you're starting with compacted soil, you have to till. But once things get going, I think someone put a little comment in there about their mycelium. Once you get that fungal life in there, don't touch it. Tilling and disturbing the soil damages the fungal population much, much more than the microbial population. And the fungal population is what all those hyphae make the most soil structure. So tilling it, really you need to think about, is it necessary? And then what am I going to do after I till or disturb my soil so that I don't have to do it next year, right? Mm-hmm. I'm going to change what I'm doing. Okay. I'm going to add more compost. Instead of like pulling every root out of the soil at the end of the garden, I'm going to leave them in there to decompose, right?
Yeah, and this was something that was in Dr. Judy's interview actually, and it was so cool because she was talking about like a pot that she had, and she would grow things in it every single year, and she used to pull the roots out, and she learned that she just left. It was better actually just to leave the roots in, and it built the fungal matter and it built the bacterial microbes, and it also the roots aerate the soil, they feed the soil. And so when you're for container gardeners out here, you want to leave those roots in because they're food for the whole soil food web that's in there.
And I love it. Patrick wrote in here a good recipe for compost teas. Compost teas are terrific, particularly if you have a really big area, right? And you don't want to, you can't really put down a lot of compost, but a tea will get you that microbial activity. And molasses is in this recipe. Molasses is what we call fresh soil organic matter, meaning the plants will eat it really quite rapidly. But again, you need to have that base in the soil to keep feeding the microbes. But you do need to have that in the brew to get them sort of reproducing. Microbes reproduce very, very, very quickly. So you can have a burst in the population with some good. And I like the idea of the kelp. All those sea products are just amazing in there to get them going.
Yeah, and Alex says, he asked about the Gaia Green Organic 444, and I actually don't know that, but one thing I do know for sure is OMRI, which is, I wish I could remember what it stands for, but OMRI will certify organic products and verify that they are safe to use. So if you see an OMRI label, OMRI, on the product that you're looking to use, you can pretty much almost guarantee that it is safe to use, because in North America and Canada, for example, there's OMRI certified products, and people there, and if they are, then you can almost guarantee that you can use them in organic production. Not always, depending on your certifying body, but most of the time. And then I can't remember, there's thanks, Leslie, for putting that in South America and in Europe. I wish I could remember the names of the organizations that do that. They're just escaping my brain, but they also verify inputs. And then you can also look to see if something's certified organic, because sometimes even kelp and seaweed inputs, they can be certified organic through different certification bodies. And then you just know you're getting a purer product. So it's not that one is better or worse or greater or less than, it's just, it's verified that there's no funny business going on.
Yeah, yeah, and Omri is a terrific group, and you'll see that label on a lot of things. You should still read it and educate yourself. One other thing I'll say, and I assume for this group it's not going to be too controversial, which is that there has been some early evidence that that the particularly row crops that we use in the United States, most of which have been genetically modified, have not necessarily on purpose, but because we've been chemically farming for so long, they are no longer that effective in working with microbes. So there are some, because you hear these stories from big ag saying, we used our whatever Monsanto seed and we did these soil microbial things and it didn't work. We had a lower yield. Now, the symbiosis of plants and microbes has been going on for millions of years. As we separated that and got crops that worked really well with the chemical farming, it doesn't mean they're good with more natural microbial farming. A lot of people who are going regenerative, and I'm sure all of you do, are going back to heirloom, right? Heirloom seeds, because first of all, they are just like a baby when they're born, coated in microbes, right? We know that seeds are inoculated by the plant to have microbes around them. If they're purchased from a large company, sometimes they're washed and that goes away, right? Same thing with eggs, right? If you get an egg out of a chicken and don't wash it, you could keep it on the counter forever. But if you wash it, you have to refrigerate it. So there's something to be said for paying attention to both what you're putting into the soil and then what seeds are you using. Am I using a seed that has been designed for chemical farming? It will not work with microbial farming, right? It doesn't mean that microbial farming is bad, right? So heirlooms and these hybrids that people are growing now I know in a lot of other countries where there's not so much genetic modification, but not just sort of the lab modification, but we modify stuff by picking different crops in this country. So if there's a row crop that works really well on 1,000-acre farms, you can bet it probably won't be as good in a microbial based community. So think about what seeds are you using, and is that a factor when you think about how are my crops doing?
That's some great feedback, Laura.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful, because I think most of the people in this room are using, I don't know. I actually don't know, because there's a lot of new gardeners, and I know that in our farming, like in the Soil Summit, there's a lot of people who are using organic seeds and heirloom seeds. So I'm curious in here today, just put like, how can I do this? Like, is everyone in this room familiar with GMOs, genetically modified foods? So just put a 1 in the chat if you are, just so I have an idea, because I actually don't know. 1. Yes. Okay, good. And most people, I think, I think would not use genetically modified seeds in this space, but I don't want to assume anything either.
There also could be times that, especially in the United States, you don't know if it's a genetically modified seed, right? Usually when there's some certification or an heirloom, there's some words, but and of course I don't, but it's just sort of one of those interesting things when you think about sort of what we've done over the past 200 years with agriculture. We hasn't just changed the soil, we've changed the seeds that we're using in really, really substantial ways. Dr. White talked really coolly about this Native American practice where they would inoculate basically seeds in water that had roots of grass in it, right? And I mean, way back when they didn't have a microscope, they didn't quite know why it worked, but that's what it is. And he reproduced that process where he took the seeds, soaked them in water that had local roots in it, and they did inoculate that baby seed so that it grew better, right, early on in its life.
That's so cool. All
Yeah,
right.
I see Patrick. I figured this was not a big GMO group, but I think it's interesting when you think about, you know, as we put pressure on our food supply, right, to become more responsible, if they're continuing to use these crops that are not designed for microbial farming, it's not going to work, right?
And I
Because
think this is, sorry,
Mhm.
Laura, go ahead.
No, that's it. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just think this is a really good opportunity to invite everyone in this room to pick up the phone, call your local MPs or your local government, and even at the federal level, and let them know that you actually care. You care, you want GMOs labeled, you want transparency in our seeds, because in Canada, we actually just lost transparency in our seed production. And it's shocking that that actually happened. And so looking for certified organic seeds, and looking for, and I will say certified organic, unless you know the person who is producing them and you can verify that their practices are integral, because certified organic seeds are really one of the only seeds that you can verify that they are coming from, they have to go through steps to verify that they are certified organic. Heritage seeds are also a great place to source seeds, and then again really researching and knowing where that the integrity of the company that's creating those heritage seeds. So I think it's more and more important. Sarah says, I'm just checking my seed packets now. Some have logos to say it's open pollinated, some are organic, and some just don't say anything. Big brand. Yeah, that's right. And unfortunately, yeah, we don't have to have labels on that use. So it's just so curious to see where we're going. Laura, so I want to circle back to you to to soil testing. And I think this is true for even for any type of soil testing, whether we're using the microbiometer or whether we're sending a sample into with Living Roots Compost Tea, who we just spoke with this morning, to grab that soil sample at the same time of the year. So maybe it's in the spring, or maybe it's I don't know, partway through the year, but just noticing what your rhythm is. And what I do love about the microbiometer though, is that you can, because it's so affordable, you can test it like every 6 weeks, and just kind of learn the flow and the rhythm of the soil that you're stewarding and working with.
Yeah, and one other thing is we designed the test to be used on fresh field moist soil as close to the roots as you can. If you take soil out of the ground and dry it and leave it on the counter for 2 weeks and then try to test microbes, right, which is some of the testing, for example, respiration, right, dries it out, rehydrates it, you get a different mix, right? So it's important that we say, look, you want to go out there, grab the soil. It can wait for a couple of days in the Ziploc bag, and then test it. Test that, and we detect live and dormant microbes, but obviously not dead microbes. They've been obliterated. But yeah, you do want to do it right before the planting season, maybe as the seed starts to germinate, perhaps right before harvest, and then maybe in the fall, right after harvest, when things are going dormant, to test it to say, okay, where was I this year? And then next year, where am I? Right.
That's so cool. So 3 times during the year. I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And Patrick, thank you for so much for saying that you 90% of your seeds are from your own seed saving. And that is the ultimate, right? That when we can save our own seeds and trade with our neighbors. And the more you save seeds from your own garden or own farm, the more climate oriented they become too. So they become more heat resistant or more cold resistant, or they actually have their own intelligence and adapt to your environment. So that's a superpower that Patrick is sharing. So thanks for that. And Jane says, talking of seeds going in water with plantain roots, has anyone tried rooted willow slips in the water? Yeah, so you're talking about planting like cuttings from the willows and putting them in the water and rooting them, I think. Jane, maybe just clarify that, because if that's what you're asking, then yes, it works. Patrick, I've been building my own organic soil for 20 years now, and no chemicals or poisons are used anywhere in my property. That's awesome, Patrick. Thank you. And I'd love to know, Patrick, you've shared quite a bit in here. I know there's lots of seasoned farmers and gardeners in here who've been doing it for decades. Just maybe drop into the chat some of your favorite ways that you've built your soil health, so that some of the people who are new to gardening and new to growing their own food here can also learn from you, because this is how it's done, in community. And the more you can share with us what has worked for you, the more we all get to learn and lift each other up. So I can say for me, I can tell you, I'm in southeastern Saskatchewan, and I moved here about 3 years ago. And the land hadn't been sprayed or anything like that for decades, but it had been used for hay for quite a long time, and just taken, hay. Before that, cattle ran on it, and pretty low microBIOMETER. But one of the cool things is I had access to straw. So I've used straw as a mulching, and it is amazing the impact that it has had on the soil. And I can see a difference between the straw that is sitting on, or the soil that has straw sitting on it, and like 2 inches over, the soil is all dried out, and this soil that has that mulching on of straw is moist. I never had to water my strawberries at all last year, and they produced really well, and they had moisture all year long. It was absolutely amazing. So it was pretty cool. Switchgrass for mulch is best where I farm. Okay, cool. That's awesome. And then also cover cropping is really powerful. We've talked about it a lot. So if you're not familiar with it and you've never done it before, I highly encourage you to check out Jolene Wainwright's session on cover cropping, because it's great. She is a gardener herself, so small scale gardener. And if you're looking for information on that and you are just have a backyard garden, then it's a great place to start.
And there are some neat companies that do mostly for bigger parcels of land that do sort of custom mixes. So they have non-GMO organic seeds. You can send in the soil and answer a questionnaire, and they'll mix a bunch of different things, right? Because we're trying to move away from monocropping. So if you have 50 acres, you don't want to put down a monocrop, cover crop. But they have real neat mixes. It's called Green Cover Seed. I forgot where they're from. And they do some really neat stuff with getting, they even have flower ones. So it could be sort of a beautiful, field of flowers as well as you're building soil structure.
Yeah, super cool. Awesome. So just if anybody leaves, oh yay, Jill, that's awesome. We started out driving the streets of our town during fall leaf. I love that. I just love it. And you'd pick up and would fill your truck with the bags of fallen leaves, contact local tree service and have them drop their leaves and wood chips. And that's a great tip. It makes really good compost and mulching. William Dam Seeds have excellent info and choices. Recover crops. They do, Bob. They do. That's in Canada. I use grass clippings, no spray in my garden. I save leaves and shred them and add fresh grass clippings for your compost. Those are super awesome habits.
And I don't know. Worm castings is another big, something that's easy, I think if you like worms to do, and really, really good for the soil.
Yeah, they are. And we didn't touch on it with Troy, but you can make compost extracts and tea from the worm castings as well.
Yeah.
We just talked compost. Awesome. And Patrick says, I collect all my leaves and even leaves from the neighbor's trees, so I can get at least 1 foot deep of leaves on my garden each fall. Also, all the grass clippings go into the veggie patch, and also strip all prunings of the leaves there. That's awesome. Yeah, leaves are, it just, I'm so excited to see more and more people using the grass clippings and the leaves from their lawn. And in case you weren't on the session earlier, I can't remember who it was with, but we talked about using grass clippings. Oh, it was with Troy, actually, I think. And it's really to be mindful of how you want to use the grass clippings. So if you're using them as a mulch, you want to make sure they're dried, and so they're because they're going to break down differently on top of your soil than if they're green. If you're using grass clippings on your garden and it's just a little bit, they're going to dry out pretty quickly and go back into your soil. But if you're putting like stacks of them, then they'll go slimy and anaerobic, and that's not necessarily good for your soil. So you want to be really mindful of how to use them. High mowing seeds is an excellent source for in the USA. Absolutely. They're one of our favorites too. And Renee's, and oh my gosh, there's so many good seed companies now. It used to be hard to find good seed sources, but now there's lots and lots of good ones. Yeah. Any other questions or tips you want to share with people about building organic matter in your gardens, in your soil? Thanks, Leslie, for doing that. Fill your beds with leaves in the fall, says Jill, and it will help insulate it, and the worms will feed on them and multiply like crazy year round. That's also true. Yeah. Curious, has anyone had suggestions for slug control? Oh, that's a good question. You're going to stretch my brain here, Amber.
Yeah, I'm in the Pacific Northwest, slug land. So
we have an article in the last issue of Heart and Soul magazine about that, don't we? And my brain is just, sometimes I have a difficult time switching filing cabinets in my brain. But I know for sure, the more you build your soil, the more pest control and disease control you have. So as you said, I emailed MP about labeling seeds on GMO. Oh, yay. Thanks, Alec, for slugs. Simple answer, beer and
beer.
to track them. Yes, my tip, not the authors. We have slugs during the years and they are bad. Yeah, you know what? Sometimes I find, and this kind of goes towards creating the environment of your ecosystem, being the conductor of your farm or of your garden, right? So being mindful of what the perimeter of your garden is that's attracting the slugs. And like Charles Dowding said, if you have a problem with slugs and you're in a wet climate and you're using wooden beds, of course you're going to have problems with slugs. Slugs love the wood. That's like their nesting area. So just paying attention to what is there in your environment that they might already be liking and attracted to, and then minimizing that and going towards stuff that they don't like. I use a 4-inch border of sand. Yeah, sand. I don't like sand, or else ashes. Switchgrass can be left on gardens and added each year. Excellent for microbes, water retention, and what's switchgrass? I don't know what that is.
Do you want me to explain it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a crop that takes 3 years to mature. It's great for biodiversity. We have farmers that grow it, and it's got a lot of nutrients in it, but it dries down. And when you put it down, I've used it for probably 20 years at least, and it'll often be good without doing anything for another 2 years or so. And then sometimes you add a bit, but it does all the things I've mentioned there in the chat, and it's just fantastic. And it doesn't have like if you use wheat straw or old hay, you're going to get a lot of seeds you don't want. There's much less of that with switchgrass, and it's much more manageable, and it's nice to be, if you have to get down on the ground, it's great to work on. And my soil was basically where my gardens were. were old riverbeds. So I had to wait until it was dry enough to work. I never had to water ever there because there was enough moisture coming up from underneath. And I've been doing this kind of work for over 60 years.
So Bob, tell us how we use switchgrass then. Will we plant it and then?
Oh, most people aren't going to plant it. You're going to get it from someone who grows it. I get it in bales that are anywhere from 600 to 800 pounds to roll out, but you can get it, they can do it in small square bales. If you do that, you want to find a local farmer that's growing it, and it's pretty hardy. So it can be grown in quite a few areas. I know in Ontario, there are several people, and I've referred probably 2 or 3 dozen people over the last few years to them to get switchgrass because it's much cheaper. You're getting a large amount. So if you've got a big market garden or a big space, it's much cheaper than buying anything else. And, you know, it's the other advantage of it, because it's tough, you can arrange to make sure it's not wrapped. The string is not treated for rodents. Most things you're going to buy in a farm, the string is treated for rodents, and that's why it has that green color or reddish color, whatever, and that comes off in your work. So you want to make sure it's a hardy source, like switchgrass can be, and it's not something, because it doesn't have the seeds in it that you're going to have in other things. You don't have rodents feeding on it.
Awesome, thank you for that. Leslie just put into the chat some of Hans Gunther's, who we just interviewed, some of his suggestions for slugs, and horn silica is one of them when we talked about that. And horn silica is actually made out of the cow's horn, and it's filled with ground up crystals. And it makes sense that slugs would not like horn silica because there'd be tiny, like microscopic crystals spread throughout the air and on the plants, so they would not be attracted to that. And that is curious about electroculture, because they're finding that using crystals in electroculture actually increases the energetic vibration and life within our gardens. So that's kind of neat. That
crushed gypsum will do the same.
Awesome, thank you for that.
Which you can often get available in bags, and yeah, and there's different kinds of rocks, especially in Ontario, because we're on the Canadian Shield, the biggest and oldest rock in the world. There's lots of different stones and things that are available that can be, and they will help to heat the soil as well.
Awesome, thank you for that. All right, well, I think we are going to wrap up and say thank you to Laura. And before we go, we've got a treat for you. We've got a treat. We are gifting, Laura and microBIOMETER is gifting a microBIOMETER testing kit to someone in the room today. So it's going to be random choice from everybody who's here. And so you'll get it mailed to you. And what else can I tell you about it? You'll get it mailed to you, and we want to see pictures of you using it and tagging microBIOMETER and Heart and Soil so that we can share your story and help you along and all the fun things. Raymond, you already put the winner as I'm chatting. Hey, Raymond, woohoo! So cool. Yes, it is your lucky day. Oh, that's so awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and we will send it out to you next week. Natalie, you get the address, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and we have another one that we're going to be giving away as well. And are we going to do that tomorrow, Leslie? Laura?
It's up to you.
Do it in the morning session? Congrats, Raymond, Isaac. Yeah. Yes, tomorrow. Okay. All right. So we'll do it tomorrow, Laura, if that's cool with you.
Absolutely. Just send us the name, and yeah. And if you want the kit, just so you know, I know we said it's low cost. The starter kit has all the reusable supplies in it. It comes with 15 tests. Then you can get refills, and it retails for $135 US, shipped US and Canada free. So, and then refills come as you go. And the app is free, and you have all the data, and you can keep it, use it over time, share it with people. And we love feedback from people. We're a very small company, so you guys are our quality testers. And so if you email us from our website, microbiometer.com, all 4 of us will get your message.
That's
The whole
awesome.
company.
The whole company. And
Yes.
it's kind of like Heart and Soil. We're also just a small startup as well.
Yes.
We have 2 of us that are here working together. So the microbiometer, you can also use the coupon Heart Soil 15, and that'll give you 15% off of the microbiometer if you choose that you want to use it. And what I would suggest when you order it is to order refills at the same time. And then can you? Yeah.
Yeah. Or the discount code works on refills as well.
Okay, perfect. Well, there
Yeah.
you go. So,
Yes.
it's easy to use and it's kind of fun. It's what I like about it is it's affordable, and it's something that we can kind of measure, and we can verify what we're seeing with our eyes, or smelling with our nose, or feeling with our hands, for people who like that kind of scientific chart to watch. And at the same time, it's if you're happy with where you're at too, that is also super cool. So go to the link in the you can go to microbiometer.com or LinkedIn. I see these. I'm going to just yes, microbiometer.com. I'm just going to put that in separately in the chat, because it's kind of lost in all the, there you go. Microbiometer.
And thank you for having me. It was really fun. It's always nice when you work on all this stuff to hear from people and hear all the cool things people are doing and what they're learning and how they're contributing to the improvement to the soil and to our health and our food supply. So thank you.
Yeah. And all the replays are on the watch page. And Laura, thank you for the incredible work that you're doing and supporting our regenerative, organic, biodynamic communities with tools to help us learn more about the impact that we're having. And if you want to follow Microbiometer on Instagram and Facebook, they're also there as well, where they post pictures and information. So it's a great place to connect. And they also share different cool interviews with different scientists who are studying soil health.